said, quote, today, I withdraw from consideration by the U.S. Senate my war powers resolution after the Biden administration agreed to continue working with my office on ending the war in Yemen. A lot of kind of MAGA people, just like they're opposed to the war in Ukraine, are increasingly opposed to this. The Republican leadership, the establishment, is still behind this war. They're not going to let this vote come up in the House. The only chance to make it happen is now. Why are people on the left not angrier, not necessarily because Bernie backs down, but because he so clearly has so little respect for them and their intelligence and their dignity that he's willing to just lie to their face so transparently? Why did they take that?
I have no idea. For the last 2 years, I've been trying to get people to not take it because I think what Bernie is doing is extremely nefarious, and he is taking advantage of desperate people who are looking for any sort of hope. Now, what Bernie did is extremely, extremely nefarious for the reason that you point out. He knows that there's no chance of this passing with the next term of Congress. But let's analyze why did he wait 2 years? So Bernie gave a great speech on why we should reject the support of the Yemeni war. But if you force this to a vote, even if it fails, you get the people on the record who support that. And the media, without a doubt, would attack Bernie Sanders. Biden and the White House be upset. But this is why you draw public debate and you embarrass the people who are genocide supporters. They are supporting a genocide, and this is the argument they can win on in public. But they don't want to have that battle because they do not want to make the Democratic Party look bad at the end of the day. That is what it is. That's why they put this resolution when Trump was involved. That's why they don't even want to have a debate. They don't want to expose to otherwise progressive-minded people that the Democratic Party is pro-war. They rather pretend, oh, we're working with the party. We're going to end the war by having great communication with them. So that's why it frustrates us in that revolutionary blackout. We try to make people angry at the people that are complicit with insane crimes.
What's poppin', my friends? My family, we are back again. Welcome. Let me make sure I got the right banner up. Welcome to Arbin Thursday Live. This has been a great week for us. We had Shama Sawant, Wyatt Reed, had a great conversation with Glenn Greenwald. And now we have another fantastic guest. I want to make sure, let's put up. This is the host of the American Exception podcast, amazing historian and journalist. Thank you for joining us on Revolutionary Blackout once again. Aaron Good, what's up, brother?
Thanks. It's great to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. Always good to talk to you. We have a lot of great anti-imperialist journalists and historians on here. You definitely one of the top ones. And I just want to get your thoughts on the recent news regarding Yemen and your thoughts on like Bernie proposing a resolution, him pulling that support because his strategy is to wait for a few months. So do you want to speak on that? Just start off and why it's so important to resist U.S. presence in Yemen. But once again, welcome to the show, Aaron.
Yeah, it's great to be here, and I can't tell you exactly what goes on in Bernie Sanders' head, but I know that in the 90s, up until in the 80s and in the early 90s, he was more of a critic of U.S. foreign policy and U.S. imperialism. Yep. And in the spectrum of what is allowable in the United States Congress, he's one of the more critical people, but that means very little. With this, in the 90s, at some point, I think when he decided he was going to go beyond being a mayor and being a congressman, and somebody else who's more familiar with his history could probably be more precise about this, but it seems that he started to make some compromises, especially on this issue of foreign policy, which is really what the U.S. is all about. It's not a normal country with a normal democracy and a normal legislature and so on. It's trying to run a global empire, and it's trying, and it makes it a central part of this project to always deny that that's what it is in the first place, that it's not an empire. So in the 90s, there's no more Cold War, but the U.S. is still looking to prosecute the Cold War because the Cold War was really kind of a cover story really for U.S. imperialism and U.S. Wall Street taking over the whole world. And one place that was still standing was Yugoslavia. And so they set about breaking up Yugoslavia by inflaming ethnic tensions and funding separatist entities in the different republics, even sending in jihadis, that had been used in Afghanistan. They sent them into Bosnia and later in Kosovo to perpetrate terrorism and all the things that they do best. And Bernie Sanders was, he didn't openly support the clandestine stuff because that was kept hidden. It still is not acknowledged by the U.S. government very well, but it's pretty well documented at this point. But he was for the Yugoslavian war, and so I think this was a tip off that this was kind of the direction that he was headed in. That he was going to not be a strong opponent of U.S. imperialism, and he might even support U.S. imperialism in some cases. So I think that what we're seeing with Yemen is, and how weakly he goes after this is a part of this, because I think he's bowing down to U.S. geopolitics in the region, and he apparently got told by somebody higher up than him that like this wasn't a good look. They, as you point out, they could have let it go to a vote and let it lose. At least then you've got something on the record. But increasingly, they do not even want to give people those kind of symbolic victories. I mean,
Yes.
we saw this with the union thing and the railroad workers. Like these people won't even force. They won't even take a symbolic step oftentimes, like
They won't
voting
force a
for something.
debate. Like,
Yeah.
wouldn't it be in our best interest to force a debate on the Yemen issue? Because what I'm hearing from some Bernie people is that one of the reasons why he withdraw it because he didn't have the votes. That's the messaging that's going around. He didn't have the votes. My response to that: who gives a shit? Like, if this vote happens and you make us think of it, you create a national debate. And how can anyone justify U.S. support in Yemen? And Biden has lied about this, and this is why I say on Glenn's show, this is probably his biggest campaign lie out of all of them, because that's something he said he want to end U.S. support for the Yemenis war. And now Democrats and liberals, they say, well, Biden stopped fueling Saudi warplanes, which I'm not saying that's nothing, right? That's better than nothing. But what people will leave out is that the vast majority of the casualties in this war are civilians, and 70% of the civilian casualties in Yemen are children, a lot of them who die because of malnutrition. So just stopping the bombing doesn't end that. But Aaron, do you want to continue?
I mean, this is the calculus of empires everywhere. Is you don't get to have a big empire by having any kind of normal morality. I mean, the 1990s, the U.S. killed 500,000 Iraqi children in order to maintain this sanctions regime against Saddam Hussein. And then some liberals might say, oh, it's just so senseless and mean or whatever, and it's not rational. But it actually was very rational. The whole purpose was to not allow Iraq to sell oil because it had a lot of oil, and their oil is like it just comes out of the ground, almost like hardly needs any refining at all. They're really oil rich country, and if they have the issue for the oil companies and oil producing countries, and for the U.S. because it manages and dominates some of these countries, is that the oil is not so scarce really, and it can, a lot of money is to be made with it, and if you just let people sell oil, then the prices get really low. Whereas if you can keep Iraqi oil off the market, then the oil money goes where it should, like to those North Sea companies off of Britain, off the coast of the island of Britain, in the North Sea, the Saudis who are U.S. puppets, and then you don't let Iraq sell any oil, then that really works out for them. So that's why Madeleine Albright would say it was worth it to have those sanctions in place, and they were going to remove those in the 2000s. And the appetite for them in Europe was really disappearing because of these sanctions, or because of the consequences and all the dead children in Iraq and so on. And that's probably a major driver of the Iraq war, was to like make sure that they couldn't just start selling oil, because Iraq would have wanted to be under the U.S. umbrella, or they would have wanted to reconcile with the U.S. Why wouldn't they, rather than seeing their country destroyed? But they didn't. So this is the kind of calculus of these guys, and that just shows that they are like every other empire. You have to be totally detached from the actual human beings that you're dominating and exploiting and expropriating. Otherwise, you couldn't really be an effective imperialist. So we're given the power at stake here, the massive amounts of money and lives at stake, then the consequences are much bigger than like Genghis Khan sacking a city
Yeah.
somewhere. It's like you're talking about hundreds of thousands or millions of people that are affected. And what you see in Yemen is part of the same terrible story of global imperialism.
What do you think of this? Because U.S. Foreign policy and imperialism as a whole, as Rand wrote, is mostly about serving capital. and the United States is essentially trying to cripple Europe's dependence on oil from Russia. So a lot of the Ukraine war and posturing against Russia is to get into European oil markets, and a lot of what drives U.S. policy is based on this petrodollar. What do you think? Is that accurate, Aaron?
A lot of it is based on not just the petrodollar, but the control of the Treasury bill standard, if you want to call it that. It's that
Yeah.
these, because of oil. Oil was a big part of it, and it still is to a degree. But especially in the 70s, it played a key role because when the U.S. had a crisis of too many dollars overseas and it was weakening the financial system, and they had to uncouple from gold, and that was really the basis of the U.S.-led financial order, the fact that the dollar was tethered to gold. But they, because of Vietnam War spending, they had to end that. And for a while, it was a question as to what they would do. But during this time period, the U.S. orchestrated a massive quadrupling of oil prices because the countries that were the big oil producers were all basically U.S. puppets. You had Saudi Arabia, Iran with the Shah that the CIA installed in '53, and then Indonesia as well at this time with another puppet that the U.S. installed in 1965. So they were able to deal with the issue of this dollar, these dollars that they couldn't redeem for gold. They just jacked up the price of oil, and then all of that money went to the uh, central banks of these huge oil producing companies, and then those companies were induced to invest them in the Western financial system, and that's what they did, and that's how they dealt with that problem at the moment. Now, what's happening in Europe, I don't think that it's playing out the way that they want it to,
Not at
because
all.
they can make money selling oil to them in the short run, but the issue is that they are really damaging the global financial system and the Rumpelstiltskin dollar that's given them this free ride since it really gets totally consolidated under Reagan. It was the 70s, a lot of the economic turmoil of the 70s and stagflation and so on, the Volcker shock. These were in a series of gambits that by oil and finance and really what you could call the U.S. empire to shore up this new system. And by the time of Reagan, it was fully operational. And the result was that the dollar was as good as gold around the world. And that gave the U.S. enormous power to run huge budget deficits in this military buildup under Reagan. The oil prices really fell under Reagan because they just said, hey, pump more oil, make the oil cheaper. They lowered interest rates. That's also top-down maneuver, really boosted the economy. And it was a time for Wall Street. It was the heyday of Wall Street, the 80s and 90s. And the control of oil, the control of the monetary system was a big part of that. And what's happening now, I mean, Russia is selling their oil in rubles. Europe is having to pay more for oil from not Russia. And
Yeah.
this is going to be good for oil companies in the short term. But as I say, it seems like they are hastening the creation of a new system, and that is not in their interest. I don't think that's what they set out to do. But
Diphtherias. I want you to react to this headline because we actually reported this. We reported on this a few, maybe a week or two ago. We did a segment on this. It said Europe angry that U.S. profits from Ukraine proxy war while destroying EU economy. It seems like there's only one power. There's only one state that's really benefiting from this in terms of the West. That's the United States, right?
Yeah, it would seem that way. I mean, what they thought they would accomplish by doing this is perhaps to make Russia a pariah state, and then you could sort of recreate the Cold War. But the problem is that the global South is not going to go along with this,
They're not.
and they miscalculated. I've tried to figure out what they were thinking about, and because with Ukraine, I wonder. One possibility is that they actually, and this is sort of corroborated by The Intercept, that they expected Russia to go in and just lay waste to Ukraine like the U.S. would have in that situation,
Yeah,
and that it would make Russia such a pariah that they could sort of put a
that's such a
new
good
iron
point.
curtain up. Maybe that's what they were thinking. I really can't figure it out, but what Russia has done by really being very methodical about grinding down the Ukrainian military, and really they've absorbed territories, but those are territories with people that by and large are Russian speakers and
Yeah,
wanted to join Russia. So you have this issue of self-determination that makes it not so clear cut in terms of international law, on top of the fact that Ukrainian sovereignty is quite debatable after 2014 in the first place. And it just has not played out in a way that's been beneficial to the US. and it's potentially damaging to this world order, and it may be the catalyst for the end of this world order that they have maintained since the end of World War II, and then they adjusted it in the 70s with the post Bretton Woods system, and now it seems to be unraveling.
Now, people who watch RBN know I've been kind of debating this with myself. I'm not even sure either. Like, what was the U.S. and Europe's thoughts in engaging with this Ukraine proxy war? There's a part of me that thinking they really was delusional, because you hear quotes from Lindsey Graham that when he said that Russia economy is like the size of Spain and there'd be nothing. Lindsey, he was mocking Putin in Russia. This is like in 2015. He said, we ever want to take out their economy, we could do it. And there are a lot of similar quotes from these politicians, a lot of elites that's like, the Russian economy is nothing. We can shut them down. And these are years leading up to this conflict. So there's some that seem like they believe it. But what I mostly, like maybe 60-40, I lean towards, is maybe they don't give a shit. And maybe they meant to crash everything, to have like a global reset. I'm not sure. Like you said, I like what you brought up, because that's a very interesting point of view, where they just thought that Russia is going to be as barbaric as the United States. Like when the amount of civilians that we killed in Iraq the first year, they expect Russia to do the same thing. And with Russia's approach and the fact that this is not a black and white issue, like U.S. corporate media try to purvey, where they're like, oh, you have Putin, the evil bad guy, Ukraine is the hero, the victim that is being brave. Not that simple. You have Zelensky, who sold his own people out. And I have a headline I'm going to show you guys later, like how Western media used to talk about this issue. And there was this story that was attacking and smearing Zelensky, and they said Zelensky was the pro-Russian TV president. This is how the West used to talk about Zelensky back when he used to advocate for peace. Do you want to speak more on that, Aaron?
It is weird. I mean, the coverage of Ukraine since the coup has been very strange, and it basically covered up the fact that it was a pretty obvious U.S. coup. It had all the elements in place. You could pretty much map out how it was analogous to like the original 1953 coup in Iran, complete with like false flag violence and organized street protests and so on. But it has gotten worse. Things that they used to mention, they don't anymore. They used to talk about more. I mean, the Guardian ran a John Pilger article very shortly, just months after the coup, saying like this was a U.S. backed overthrow, and if Putin takes the bait and fights a war there, then he'll play the role that the West has cast for him. So people saw this coming. But when this Intercept published something a few months ago that said the CIA initially thought at the time that Russia would roll over Ukraine in a couple of weeks, and that it would be some protracted thing. And if they thought that, and they knew that they were provoking this, then that means that to me makes me wonder if that's really what they were trying to do. If they were wanting to make Russia just a pariah. I mean, that sounds it all sounds crazy, but no matter what, there's some craziness and bad judgment going on in these circles. That much is clear at this point. And I don't know if they've just kind of lost the plot and don't even know what they're doing anymore. But the sanctions, those don't necessarily help Russia. But I think the U.S. forgot that import substitute industrialization, which is what they force on Russia with these sanctions, this was actually the way that other countries wanted to try to help themselves back in the day. This is how the U.S. became a global power, by these policies that would make it harder to import things from Britain so the U.S. could develop its own industry. They're basically making Russia pursue a policy that's probably in Russia's national interest in the long term. But I don't even know. I think they may believe their own free trade propaganda so much that they've kind of lost the plot. I don't know, but it's fascinating to watch, as long as they don't blow up the world.
Like, the only thing I think of is maybe there are two factions, like the smart elite and the dumb elite. Like the smart elite that know this is all propaganda, they know it's all bullshit, but they go along with it because it makes some money. And then you got dumb elites like Lindsey Graham. Like, he's the one I know for sure. Like, you got dumb elites who really believe, who legitimately, like, maybe there's like news anchors who, they're just dumb actors and they just listen to what the Pentagon say. Maybe they legitimately believe that like Ukraine is losing, that the U.S. could stranglehold Russia and that their economy will tank. We showed this old quote from Ursula von der Leyen on around February and March, when this conflict was first getting started, where she was like, man, all you guys concerned over oil shortages, energy shortage, you guys are just being negative. Like, we're gonna win this. It's gonna be over in like 6 months. I remember we was laughing at her then, and we was telling them about the winner. And now a lot of people are being upset. Like the mainstream media not showing the anti-NATO protest. And I just want to read just a few, just for the people who missed our original coverage. Literally, I'll just read the first two paragraphs so you guys get the idea of what's happening. Cracks are emerging in the NATO alliance. Numerous Western corporate media outlets have published reports showing growing political divisions between the United States and the European Union. EU leaders are angry that the US is making a lot of money from the proxy war in Ukraine, both by selling vast quantities of weapons and making Europe reliant on its expensive liquefied natural gas instead of Russia's significantly cheaper pipeline. In countries like India and like you mentioned earlier, the global south, they're like, no, nigga, we about our business. We don't care about upholding your guys' political interest. Now, once you react to this, now since we're talking about the U.S. selling weapons, this is something I've been twisting the knife in the side of a lot of the progressives and liberals. These are the people who virtue signal about being anti-gun violence, right? They don't care that they flooded the market in Ukraine. And you have reports now that is straight up acknowledging that they can't even track these weapons. Now look at Yellen. She's the make sure I get her title right. The Treasury Secretary, Janet Yellen. And remember, we did a segment like maybe last week. We were talking about the Times nominated person of the year, and she was on that list. I didn't know her by name. I was like, who the fuck is Janet Yellen? I know that's on top of my head. But what, and guys, I want to ask you guys this question. Now that I know, like, I was like, all right, why is this person, Janet Yellen, why was she on the Times Person of the Year? That made no sense to me. That's why I was like, who the fuck is this? But look what she says. And I want you to react to this. And then I'm going to show you guys a story about the United States not being able to track the weapons in Ukraine. Yellen says U.S. to aid Ukraine for as long as it takes. This is December 11th. And they keep saying this. Like, what kind of democracy is this? Like, they are sending our taxpayer money permanently to Ukraine. Like, this conflict doesn't seem like it's going to have an end anytime soon. And we're not voting on this. There's no voting this out. So what's your initial reaction to seeing the fact that so many people in the U.S., so many people in NATO? I'm gonna show you guys the quote from the NATO chief here soon, where she said, "Oh yeah, we want to engage with more war with Russia." So do you have a response to Aaron? Anything you want to add to this?
I mean, she's a Treasury Secretary, and I think she has some record of having been critical of past, you know, problems at the Fed and elsewhere. So, I mean, they always the time in life empire was kind of the original PR organ for the U.S. empire. The original essay on the American century before the U.S. even really gets started in World War II was from Time Life publisher Henry Luce, the American Century essay. So they're always a really good snapshot of what the U.S. propaganda is at the moment, of what the establishment wants you to think. And so they want you to really think that the Treasury is in good hands and that this war on Ukraine is really important and so on. I mean, I think that's the general thinking there. Of course, the guy that ends up getting Person of the Year is Zelensky, right? I mean, he was on the cover.
And that was the most predictable thing ever, too. Like, yeah. I literally said that was going to happen.
And I mean, what he has done to his country, what really, he inherited the situation, and I think he just follows orders. And if he knows that if he doesn't do what Washington wants, the Nazis will kill him. So he's in a bad situation, and the weapons that they're pouring into Ukraine, you know, Ukraine was already recognized as the most corrupt country around.
Yeah,
and you're spending billions in weapons in there, in this situation, in the aftermath of which I think you're going to have a precarious Europe, and all of these right-wing groups. Because these weapons are going to fall into the hands of right-wing terror groups, paramilitary groups, organized crime groups, intelligence cutouts. And you could end up with a kind of super turbocharged, even extra Nazified version of like Gladio, which during the Cold War acted as a kind of secret police for NATO and thus for Wall Street, where if leaders were going to do something the U.S. didn't like, they could just, have them erased. I mean, that seems to be what happened to Aldo Moro, for example, in Italy. He was making a compromise with the communists in Italy to form this new coalition government. Henry Kissinger told him, if you go along with this, you're gonna die. You're gonna be killed by some marginal elements, and you're just gonna end up dead. So you should stop what you're doing. He proceeded, and then he gets kidnapped by these Red Guard peoples or Red Brigades, who were manipulated by Gladio entities, CIA, NATO. CIA and NATO managed this Gladio network of paramilitaries and fascists and so on, rehabilitated Nazis, let's just say repurposed Nazis and Italian fascists and mobsters. I mean, so in the aftermath of this war, with all these weapons flowing around with these white right-wing groups, you're going to have, it'll be a playground for the clandestine services. I mean, you can have these leaders who might be nationalists, who might want to reform their own countries and look out for their own national interests. They can be taken out by right-wing elements. And at the very least, you've got kind of a built-in cover story of like, oh, well, we were just so careless with all these rocket launchers. Who would have known they'd shoot, the German minister of the interior or whatever.
Yeah, you guys have no idea how gangster all ruling class is. I said that months ago. Like we know how unhinged Zelensky has been, but imagine if Zelensky and there was reports that he did this summer and Boris Johnson shut it down. But imagine Zelensky imagine Zelensky said, "No, fuck you, Boris. I'm gonna fulfill my campaign promise, and I'm gonna allow the people who want to be part of Russia become Russian, and I'm gonna govern my area like a powerful leader." I think if that would have happened, you call me a conspiracy theorist if you want. I think Russia would have assassinated Zelensky. I think that's
Russia or the Nazis. I mean,
no. What I'm saying is Russia would assassinate.
Oh yeah, I gotcha.
He would have got killed by whether the ass off of the Western thugs, and you know how our propaganda worked. They would be like, "Oh my God, Russia took out Zelensky," and it will be something that the mainstream wouldn't know about. We wouldn't have tangible proof to maybe years later. It'd be one of those things, but that's once again, I got no proof for that.
Look, they said Russia blew up the Nord Stream, which is the most absurd thing imaginable. Even though a few people actually were like high-fiving themselves over it when it happened in the first place, but then they were like, no, it was Russia. Russia did it. I mean, this is what they do,
Yeah, that was the best example of how they shamelessly lie about those kind of things. If they lie about that, they would want. If Zelensky really got out of hand, because you mentioned it before, Zelensky was threatened by the Azov Battalion. Don't pursue peace, and this is what people don't understand about the violent Nazi-ridden state of Ukraine. You have a lot of Ukrainian citizens. That's why they elected Zelensky, because they wanted peace. But you're not allowed to have pro-peace demonstrations. This is why the Azov Battalion have caught and tortured people who they consider to be traitors. So yes, a lot of Ukrainian people are pacified and they go along with this because they know they're this radical Nazi threat. If you oppose our agenda, they will go after you. You know why? Because they're radical Nazis. There's been large reportings of this, of the Romani people, ethnic Russians, or anyone who express quote unquote pro-Russian sympathies. They will be attacked, dragged, tortured, and killed by the Azov Battalion. And what the Western media haven't talked about is whenever Ukraine does go on their offensive and they take land back, what do they do to the people who was pro-Russian in those areas? The media leave out the fact that these people get killed. Like when Ukraine take these places and they see someone who's helping Russia, it's over. It's over for them. Now I'm gonna show you guys this a few of these receipts. And now this is what I mentioned earlier. Joe Stein spoke about it. We had the NATO chief said full-blown war with Russia is a possibility. Anyway, let me read the tweet. Jill Stein says, NATO chief says a full-blown Russia-NATO war is a real possibility that may go horribly wrong as he charges ahead. How can a warmonger we never elected drag us into a war we never authorized? That can kill us all with no questions asked. When it comes to very, very important policies and foreign policy and actions of our executive branch and the military, there is no democracy in this country. Do you guys understand? Like, there's nothing that we can do in the booth that will stop the advance of the military-industrial complex. That is what I mean when I say we live in a capitalist dictatorship. Raytheon and Boeing, they are making record amount of profits right now, and there's nothing we can do to vote them out. They won every single election. Now, we see, as I mentioned, they're making record profit. I want to get to this part here. This is why I already kind of prefaced this, but I want to get your reaction to the last few receipts here. U.S. cable warns of major barriers to tracking Ukraine aid. The State Department cable services amid growing calls for strict oversight of the money and weapons flowing to Ukraine. Now, here's Kim.com. He says U.S. weapons for Ukraine go missing and are sold on the black market to terrorists, criminal gangs, and warlords. In a leaked U.S. diplomatic cable, a U.S. government official admits that there's nothing they can do about it. There's nothing they can do about it. How long until a civilian plane or high-speed train blows up? And this is actually, I want your thoughts because the CBS, before I get into that part, because CBS reported on this weeks ago, and they were forced to retract this story. But before I show you guys that, Aaron, do you have any initial reactions to reports of the West having a hard time tracking these weapons? Like, this is something that we predicted on this show quite some time ago. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, there's a few things there. I mean, the possibility of the full-blown war with NATO and the U.S. is something that people should take seriously, and then you wonder why this person is saying this. If this person were more reasonable, they would be putting out statements to the effect of, like, the EU, we must avoid any direct conflict between NATO and Russia because this means nuclear doomsday. So this is the obvious thing that everybody should be thinking about. The obvious conclusion of any sane person who looks at this is that only by escalating can Ukraine hope to even achieve a stalemate in this war. Only with more and more escalation and money, and up to a point, this would ultimately mean introducing actually NATO forces in there. And Russia would likely perceive this kind of escalation as understandably, as an existential threat to the existence of the Russian state, at which point nuclear weapons could be introduced. And at that point, you would have it would very escalate to full-on nuclear exchange, because you can't really have a war between nuclear armed powers where they don't use every bit of their arsenal to achieve victory and defend themselves and or wipe out the other side. So the obvious conclusion to this is that they should negotiate immediately, because the escalatorily speaking, I don't see how it doesn't lead to either Russian victory or nuclear doomsday. And that's just the way that it would be. It would be the same way if Russia attempted something like this in Mexico. If Russia overthrew the Mexican government, installed a puppet, and then started arming the new Mexican puppet state with lots of weapons and such, the U.S. would invade. They wouldn't wait 8 years. They wouldn't wait 8 days probably, and they would crush them. And there wouldn't be much that Russia could do except for things that would start nuclear war. This is just the situation that they're in, and Russia sees itself, understandably, as protecting Russian sovereignty and the Russian nation state and the Russian people. They've already launched some attacks that are pretty close to being able to, the distance from Moscow to Kiev. So they've already demonstrated in this war that, yeah, actually Ukraine is in a threatening position vis-a-vis Russia. But of course, that's why the U.S. overthrew the government in the first place. Why did the U.S. put all that money into Ukraine and then stage that coup? It was precisely because turning that country into a NATO outpost was an enormous threat to Russia, to which Russia responds after 8 years of trying to work it out diplomatically. And it was very predictable. And it was predicted by people like Mearsheimer and Pilger. And so now you have this total calamity of the war, and also of these weapons that are going to be going around, and to make it so that it's very unlikely that in the long run the violence and mayhem will stay confined within the borders of Ukraine, or what used to be Ukraine. It's a total mess.
Let me show you, since you were speaking about nuclear war, the insane rhetoric that comes from the United States. This is from earlier this year. U.S. defense to its workforce. Nuclear war can be won. And you see these people say this kind of stuff all the time, the neocons. And I'm talking about the worst. I'm not talking about boutique neocons. I'm talking about the worst of the worst. These are the people that say, who cares we made Putin desperate enough to use a nuke? Right? Who cares about that? And Putin was very clear. He said, the threat of nuclear options on the table if the Russian state is threatened. So only you can stop this by ending your guys' attempt of regime change in Russia and destroying the Russian state like you guys want. But Putin and for like weeks and weeks after Putin said this, there was the narrative, and actually it's still going on where they said Putin may launch a nuke. He threatened nuke. No, he says only if it's a threat to their state, which everyone who has nukes would do. So this is actual quote from Putin, and compare this to U.S. leaders. And this is the quote no one reported on.
Yeah, they always mischaracterize it because my understanding is he's typically just restated what the actual the Russian nuclear strategy is, the official position. But that gets reported in the West as Putin threatens nuke use again. Like that's how it's been reported. It's very, I mean, it's deceptive, but of course that's what we've come to expect.
Yeah, exactly. I'm glad you brought that up because that's exactly what I've been pointing out, and I've been following the corporate news coverage of the Ukraine war just so I can do propaganda debunking segments for you guys. And guys, I know you guys don't watch it like I do, but it's like because every segment they say Putin is threatening to use nuclear war. We gotta stop Putin from you. Like he never said that. He never said that. There's actually more evidence of the West saying this shit than Putin. You guys understand? And once again, I'm not one of the people that pretend Putin is perfect, but there's no need to lie. If Putin's a bad guy, as you guys say he is, why you have to lie on his name? Why you have to lie about what he says? And I want to get back to this story because you also mentioned this as well. There's so much to talk about this. We're still going to talk about the UN General Assembly vote, but I'm going to show you guys this here. Hold on, let me turn the audio on because I'm going to show you the old CBS clip. And we reported on this. I know Jimmy reported on this, and a lot of people reported on this as well. When it happened, oh damn, I fucked it up again. When CBS, they reported that the West has no way to tracking weapons, and then when they reported that, they took a ton of heat from NAFO, the North Atlantic Fellows Organization, NATO stands. You had Ukraine, literally top level government officials. They're saying CBS is under the tank of Putin. Now, these stories are being I picked these sources for a reason. Like this is Politico, guys.
This is basically
they all admit it
CIA
now.
cutout.
Sorry, what was that?
Politico may as well be a CIA cutout. I mean,
yeah, so exactly, and that's why even if Politico is acknowledging now how you know they were extremely behind. Now I'm gonna show you guys this. I covered this quite some time ago. But I'm going to show you guys the official report that CBS broke down that essentially explained what the mainstream media is finally admitting, right? So let's watch this. And remember, they were forced to apologize. They deleted the tweet, and they had the entire Ukrainian government go after them. Look at this.
Historic flow of weapons coming into Ukraine. Do we have any sense as to where they're going?
We don't know. There is really no information as to where they're going at all.
All this stuff goes to the border, and then kind of like something happens, it kind of like 30% maybe reaches its final destination.
30%? Are you concerned about weapons getting in the wrong hands?
I don't care at all whether that happens.
What sort of a unit do you command? Can't say. Okay.
The U.S. has sent tens of thousands of anti-aircraft and anti-armor systems, artillery rounds, hundreds of artillery systems, switchblade armored drones, and tens of millions of rounds of small arms ammunition. But in a conflict where front lines are scattered and conditions change without warning, not all of those supplies reach their destination. Some also reported weapons are being hoarded, or worse, fear that they are disappearing into the black market, an industry that has thrived under corruption in post-Soviet Ukraine.
I can tell you unarguably that on the frontline units, these things are not getting there, all right? Drones, switchblades, IFACs, they're not, all right? Body armor, helmets, you name it.
Is it safe to characterize this as a little bit of a black hole?
I suppose if you don't have visibility of where this stuff is going, and if you're asking that question, then it would appear that it's a black hole, yeah.
As we fuel Ukraine with so much of this, isn't there a danger that we're just creating the next insurgency, the next failed state?
That's one of the reasons we have to win the war. I mean, if we lose the war, if we have this kind of gray zone, semi-failed state scenario or something like that, that's why we got to win. If you do this, you funnel lots of lethal resource into place and you lose. then you will have to face the consequences.
So CBS made a mistake here of doing actual journalism. They did actual journalism, and they got in trouble for that. Do you have any reaction to that, Aaron, before we move on to the next part?
I mean, it's interesting that it ever got put out there in the first place. Did they recant it, or did they just take it down?
They recanted it. They took they posted that video. They took it down. They deleted the original tweet when they reported it. Like, you can't find the tweet on this.
So they may have taken it. But did they ever issue something to say we were wrong? Because it almost like
I think they did. I gotta make sure I remember.
Okay.
But I'm pretty sure they retracted it.
I'd be surprised if they went that far, because that's not good if you're to have to issue that sort of a correction. It's bad for you journalistically speaking to say that, because then you have to explain how something like that ever got past the editing process. Anyway, it just makes you lose credibility to the extent that they have it.
Here. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt.
Down.
I'll just show you the update on that, because here it is. Yeah, I got it kind of right there. CBS partially retracts documentary that outraged Ukraine by claiming that the U.S. weapon shipments were gone missing. So yeah, they partially retracted that.
Interesting. They said it's updating it. Okay, that said.
Let me read the sub headlines again. It says CBS said it was updating a documentary. So they took that in, like, we got to update it. That's crazy. And that said most weapons sent to Ukraine don't reach the front. It admitted that a figure is cited claiming only 30% of military aid arrives was out of date. What does that mean? Like, this war was less than a year old.
They might say that, like, okay, this was like from the time period, but now it's better. But even if it was accurate at the time, why would you? Like, everybody knows that, like, a documentary is made at a certain point and time keeps going forward after that.
Yes, Aaron, that's literally what they're saying. Look, it says since that time, Oldman said deliveries has improved. Even if that's true, I don't even believe you guys, for one.
Yeah, I wouldn't believe it without proof.
It's true. That doesn't change the story, right? That doesn't change the story in the point when they interviewed that guy, what he said at that time was true, right? But anyway, Aaron, you continue.
I mean, this is really the case with the media in general, the corporate media, and it's the case with, like, these intelligence agencies also. It's the case for understanding the empire. It's not that the CIA has to infiltrate every single newsroom and such. It's not that everyone has to be working exactly for the CIA. It's that the empire, of which the CIA is a part, and the media, this is owned by the same class of people. And so if you want to advance in corporate America, and corporate America owns all of the media outlets, then you're going to report on things almost as if you were a CIA person, by and large, because that it's the same general thing. The CIA is like the secret police of the oligarchy that owns and runs everything in this country, and then the media is more or less the PR firm that represents the oligarchy, and then tells the rest of us how it is, in accordance with the interests of their bosses. So it's all the media. The media is a mess, and it really, if you look at it, divorced of your American, myth making and illusions, then you start to understand why democracy under capitalism is very problematic. Because how do you have a free press when property rights and so on have a over-determining influence on people's awareness of what's even going on in the first place, even if they can even know, because the government can keep so much stuff secret on top of that. So the media is a mess, and I think this is how we can understand why it is such a mess.
That is such a good point. I'm glad you brought that up. And the media also doesn't talk about this, and this will be the last part, and then we just got two other quick stories. This is a report by Glenn Dyson. People forget that Zelensky won a landslide election, 73%, on a peace platform before the U.S. and far-right nationalists could threaten and flip him. This was the U.S. response to Zelensky's peace policies in 2019, and this is what I mentioned earlier. This is what the media used to say before they brought Zelensky under hill. In the psyop, where they completely forgot everything about the Ukrainian reporting in the corporate and Western media pre-February 2020, 2022 has been insane to see and see people go along with this. So this is the headline for people only listening. Ukraine's TV president is dangerously pro-Russian. And it says Zelensky could become the country's next real life leader. If his show is any guide, Ukrainians should be worried. So you guys see how they used to talk about Zelensky when he was talking about how we're gonna respect the Minsk Accords and he wanted to establish friendly relationship with Russia. And now you guys know why he quickly went to follow orders because they wasn't gonna have that. But
they should have known though. My understanding is that he was backed by an oligarch who is one of the main, or at least one of the main backers of the Azov battalion. So I suspect that he was always a guy that they knew was controllable, and that just as he was playing a part on his show, he was probably playing a part during that campaign. I mean, maybe he thought that's what he was going to get to do, but I would guess that his handlers and his paymasters had other plans for him, because those guys, I just don't believe that any sort of peace was in the offing. But they were correct about Ukrainians needing to be worried. I mean,
not for the reason they thought
right now.
Not for the reason you thought though. Now I'm gonna shift focus here while we got a little bit of time. Let's do two quick stories here. Now this is the main story, at least the one we had in our thumbnail. We've been talking about on this show the fall of U.S. unipolarity and geopolitical dominance, and the U.S. being weakened in the rise of China, the rise of Russia. This allows their allies and BRICS and other countries to be more willing to stand up to the United States. That's why you literally only see Western Europe. You have 20% of the population at best going along with the Ukraine proxy war, going on with escalating tensions with Russia and China. The rest, the majority of the population, when you look at Brazil, Lula's Brazil, when you look at Africa, when you look at all these countries, they're not going along with it. Now look at this vote. I saw this. The UN General Assembly adopts towards a new international economic order. Wow. By a vote of 123 to 50. Now, and you can speak on this. I don't know if this actually means that much in terms of material differences, but in terms of rhetoric and the direction the global geopolitical situation is becoming, it's extremely significant. And I mean, I'm not going to read all these lists of countries out, but like skimming it, like it's all former colonies and victims of imperialism by the West. It's all green. When you look at the red, like I see Australia, I see Belgium, I see Finland, France, Germany, and I'm not even trying to like Israel, obviously in the red, Italy, Japan. These are former imperial powers. People who are puppets of the West. Meanwhile, the rest of the world is like, fuck this shit. Like you see Ukraine, United States, Sweden, Finland, Switzerland, Spain. But the rest of it, like you look at all the green ones, African, South American countries, Middle Eastern countries. Extremely interesting. Do you have any take on this, Aaron?
Yeah, I mean, this gets into what we were just talking about, and it's actually it's just showing how these things really are, as I've been saying for a while and talking about this dollar system and its centrality to U.S. hegemony. The term New International Economic Order, this is not a new term. This was actually something that came about, the exact term, in a group that was trying to form in the 70s in the wake of the oil crises and the breakdown of Bretton Woods. And it was especially third world countries that were looking to take control of the not take control, but come up with a more fair and equitable international system in terms of money and finance, and also to establish better terms of trade for commodities so that they would be able to benefit and develop their own economies, their own national economies along those lines. So you would have cartels of commodities like, bauxite or tin or rubber. Yeah. All of these things that get traded internationally would be sort of similar to OPEC. Now, what people did not grasp at the time was that the OPEC oil crisis was a U.S. production. At the time, the Arabs were portrayed as these greedy villains, and it had something to do with like Israel. But all those people were U.S. puppets that were involved in that Yom Kippur war that was the sort of pretext for the oil shock, on top of some other issues dealing with like grain prices that the U.S. raised, which impacted this as well. But when other countries attempted to follow the OPEC model, they got crushed by bigger forces because the U.S. had all those petrodollars, and the shocks at that time of the oil crisis caused the economy to do badly, and international trade kind of went down because of inflation brought on by oil price increases and so on. And so those petrodollars got loaned out to those poor countries. And when the U.S. at that, because it was rational for them to do that to deal with temporary shortfalls, to borrow that money. But the problem was when the U.S. years later raised interest rates astronomically, it basically caused the economy to slow down. They couldn't service their debts, and it led to the debt crisis in the third world. And that contributed to the end of the new international economic order. It was sort of arrived stillborn, and instead you get the Washington Consensus. And those countries, because of the debt crisis, the third world debt crisis, they had to go to the IMF, and the IMF would tell them what to do, which was often like, instead of forming a cartel with their nationalized, commodities industries, the IMF would tell them you have to privatize your bauxite industry, and you better not nationalize it, and you need to make sure you cut your social spending so you can service these debts, and so on. And so this is what the companies had to do. They basically had to submit to Wall Street / Washington domination, and that was the end of the new international economic order. And it's taken this long for the dollar imperium to start to waver and falter, and now you see more things along these lines. So this vote in the UN, I think, is very significant, and the decision of the Saudis to start selling oil to the Chinese in yuan, this is significant. The U.S. idiotically forces Russia to start selling its oil in rubles. This is also bad for the dollar. It was a really dumb move on the U.S. to do this. But this just shows, in my mind, that the structural power that the U.S. had to be able to orchestrate what it did when the Bretton Woods system broke down in the 70s, that they just do not have that control over the planet in the same way, and the planet's resources. They don't have a puppet in all the resource-rich places. They don't have the same control over the currency. They have actual competitors like China, who are economic powerhouses. And the U.S., meanwhile, is basically a dysfunctional country with a dysfunctional economy that chugs along because it has this military backing it and backing the dollar and the ability to make as many dollars as they want. But we don't really have the best system for producing scientists, for producing industry and technological breakthroughs. We are this very strange, financialized, parasitic military juggernaut at this time that wants to rule over the whole world and keep the rest of the world from ever developing and prospering. And the rest of the world doesn't want to take it, or at least a whole lot of the rest of the world, as we see with that vote, which is, to me, historically really significant. And it really points to the deeper significance of these events in Ukraine and elsewhere.
Yeah, man, I love the breakdown. That's why I'm glad I have you on to break this down, Aaron. And this comment here, I guess I got to root for Argentina now, man. I guess I want Messi to win the World Cup, man. I've been watching Messi for at least about 10 years now. I've been into international soccer. It's wild. We about to have Kylian Mbappe versus Lionel Messi in the World Finals. Guys, you understand how hype I am for that. 9 a.m. Sunday. I guess I root for Argentina because they voted against this, and that's the correct Marxist-Leninist position to vote for Argentina, to root for Argentina over France. It sucks though. I like Mbappe. Obviously, the player is not. They don't have anything to do with that. But seeing Messi win his World Cup, that'd be great. That'd be great. This is the last competitive international game. Anyway, I'm getting off track here. I'm gonna show you guys another vote that was extremely interesting. And this is not new, right? This is something that we have seen. There was only 2 countries that voted against labeling Israel an apartheid state, and that was the United States and Israel. And the 2 countries that abstained was Bolsonaro's Brazil and Zelensky's Ukraine. So this is the fascist coalition on the global stage. So Zionism and Israel being destroyed is not anything new in terms of geopolitical politics. Like they lost the entire respect of the world. I mean, look at the World Cup. They've been called out by fans all over the world. Been calling out Israel, refusing to do interviews with the reporters. You have Morocco who waved the Palestinian flag. This is not a genie in the bottle like it has been like during my time growing up. So, but I still want to report on it though, even though this is not anything for the most part that's new. You had 149 nations. So it's not anywhere near a split as the last one I showed you, by the way. 149 nations representing the majority of the world's population have voted in support of a UN General Assembly resolution calling for Israel to give up its nuclear arsenal. Now, what unhinged Zionists have been saying for years now is that anyone who advocates for Israel to be denuclearized, you're a raging anti-Semite. That's what they used to say. So let's look at
the official Israel position is that they don't admit that they have nuclear weapons. So it's a weird issue all around.
Yeah, because what they would say, "Oh, you believe that Israel doesn't have the right to defend itself? Well, you think Israel? What happens if Iran attacks Israel, right? So Canada, Justin Trudeau's the quote unquote like he is the definition of a woke imperialist. Like he's the guy who pretends he's woke, but he's a hardcore genocide enabling Zionist. Obviously, Israel gonna vote against that. And to your point, if Israel gonna deny the fact they have nuclear weapons, why would they vote no on this, Aaron?
I mean, it's interesting that this is happening. I do agree with you that Israel is losing legitimacy around the world, since to the extent that it had legitimacy. I think that people, there's just especially among younger Jewish people, like you can actually hear some serious vitriol against Israel coming. It just doesn't seem like that many people want to support them anymore unless their job depends on it.
I need to think I can find it. I reported on a poll like literally months and months ago where majority of young Jewish people are against Zionism. Yeah, to your point, but go ahead, Aaron. I just want to add that.
Yeah, I mean, I worked at a high school and tried to be circumspect about this one issue because it can get you into trouble talking about it. Because at these places, like it happened to a school in the city of Philadelphia, they fired somebody for inviting a Palestinian to speak there, basically. So it's a tricky issue to want to be candid about. But at this point now, I'm kind of I'm freed at last, so I can speak more candidly about it. I don't understand, the whole idea of Zionism just seems like it cannot but be fascist when it comes down to it, and you have to have a dehumanizing of the people that were actually there. That is just perverse for to try to make that into like some kind of a Jewish endeavor. So I think that's why a lot of the sensible Jewish people are the best critics of Israel, because it sucks. I wouldn't want it would take away the issue of whether it's a Jewish state or a Hindu state or whatever. No group of people should be able to do what the Israelis are doing to the Palestinians. It's just totally immoral, and it's a violation of human rights. And then people say, does Israel have a right to exist? Well, no state has a right. A state is not a person. People have rights. A state does not have rights. It doesn't make any sense. It's ridiculous. It doesn't make much. It's totally illogical. And it's a hallmark of fascism to have a metaphysical understanding of the state. I mean, that's why they use the fasces, those bundles, those sticks all bundled together. That's like the symbol of the Italian fascists. I mean, that's like the symbol of the state that goes back to Roman time. And it's like this weird magical thing that's like, it's fascist. I mean, that's why they call it that.
And you want to know the audacity that Zionists have? They say the Jewish people that we're talking about, that they're calling out Zionism, they say they are Jews with internalized anti-Semitism. That's what they say.
Self-loathing is self-loathing. Yeah,
they're so bad faith. But this has been a great conversation. We got to do it again, Aaron. Always provide a lot of great context. Where can they find you, Aaron?
The American Exception podcast is on Patreon, and we are getting close to 100 episodes. And I'm going to have a good JFK episode out tomorrow if everything goes as it should, because There's a document release that's supposed to happen today. We'll see if it does. I'm kind of skeptical.
Is it supposed to be like super juicy or something? Like
Potentially, it's gonna it could reveal that there was some kind of CIA operation that's never been disclosed involving Oswald, but we will see if that actually if they reveal that. There's enough out there already to basically have a good sense of what actually happened with the Kennedy assassination, but we're gonna have a little more on that. I also have a book, American Exception: Empire and the Deep State, which is actually sold out now on Amazon, but they are doing a rush print of a couple thousand more. So that's been a good surprise for me that the book has been selling well. There's an audiobook version of that. And I spent over 10 years working on this. I really started doing all this research in 2009 after Barack Obama. I worked on his campaign. And then when he turned into kind of George Bush part 3, the third term of George W. Bush, I thought there's something wrong with this system. It's like criminal and lawless. And if George Bush can commit all these crimes and they're never going to go after him, I got to look deeper at this. And so I got a PhD focusing on state criminality in the U.S. empire, and finally put it into a book. And am now running a podcast because I'm likely too hot for the university in that particular way. So the podcast has actually been great fun, and it's been cool to get the book out there and get feedback on that. So I'm also on Twitter. People can find me on Twitter as well. American Exception is my handle there.
Yeah, hey, we'll make sure you guys check Aaron out. Once again, thank you for joining us, Aaron, and I appreciate everyone for watching. Make sure if you guys enjoyed this, please like, subscribe, share the channel to help us continue to grow. I think we had a great year, man. A lot of great exposure in year 2. So please help us grow. Let's help RBN hit 30K. And support the Patreon. I got links to PayPal, Venmo, Cash App if you guys want to do direct donations without any monthly requirements. So I appreciate you guys for watching. Revolutionary Blackout. We sign out. Have a good one, guys.